So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Jane Simpkiss to the De Morgan Foundation today to give us a lecture on Charles Shannon and Charles Ricketts. Jane has been the Fine Art Curator at Leamington Spa Art Gallery and Museum since 2020. In her role, she oversees the care, interpretation and display of the permanent art collection and develops and manages the gallery's temporary art exhibitions. She's curated a number of exhibitions, including Outgrowing, Flowers and Female Artists, 1700 to Now, and she's curated the current exhibition at Leamington Spa Museum and Art Gallery, which I urge you all to go and see, called Modern Pre-Raphaelite Visionaries, British Art 1880 to 1930. And her research is particularly focused on British portraiture and the role of women as artists and subjects in British painting. So over to you, Jane. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? All good. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go, and hopefully you can all see that now. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction and for inviting me to speak today as part of the De Morgan's lecture series. As Sarah just said, I'm the curator at Leamington and I am the co-curator of our current exhibition, Modern Pre-Raphaelite Visionaries, which features two beautiful works on loan to us from the De Morgan collection, along with a host of other works from our own and from national collections. And just to give you a sense, so this is just two works from our own collection, which are currently on display in the exhibition. So they are by Frederick Cayley Robinson and Simeon Solomon. So the exhibition explores a period of around 50 years at the very end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when Britain was going through great social change, and subsequently the British art scene was also undergoing change in response. And whilst many artists looked to France and the ideas of the post-impressionists, others continued to be captivated by the ideas of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and the Italian Renaissance and medieval imagery which had inspired them. And it's these artists who are at the centre of our current exhibition. Figures, as you can see on the screen, such as Frederick Cayley Robinson and Simeon Solomon, but also William Rothenstein, Evelyn Pickering de Morgan, and two artists who are the subject of this talk, Charles de Suzy Ricketts and Charles Hazelwood Shannon. And these artists have particularly captured my interest during the research for this show, and so they are forming the centre of my talk today. So the art and life of Charles Ricketts and Shannon seems to me to particularly capture the spirit of this period of change happening at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. So Shannon, and perhaps even more so Ricketts, were the last real artist devotees of the aesthetic movement of the late 19th century, which championed beauty as the most important aspect of art. And this interest permeated everything they did. And during my talk, when I discuss Shannon and Ricketts, it may appear as if I'm talking about them as a unit rather than individuals. And this is because so much of their life and art was intertwined. So, and you can see them on the screen here. We've got Shannon on the left and Ricketts on the right. And they met as teenagers whilst training in London as wood engravers. And from that point onwards, they became partners in art and also in life, living and working together on numerous joint artistic ventures until Ricketts' death in 1931. And in this talk, I'm going to focus on one painting in particular by Shannon of Ricketts, which is in the collection at Leamington Spa Art Gallery and Museum. This painting is, as I've just said, by Charles Shannon, and it depicts his partner, Ricketts, holding a Greek vase, and you can see that down in the bottom right-hand corner. And the work is currently being shown as part of a display related to our exhibition, where it has been reunited with the very Greek vase it depicts, currently on loan to us from the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. And this, I believe, is the first time that these objects have been reunited since they were parted when the painting left Shannon's possession to be sold. So during this talk, I will be unpacking the rich symbolism of this portrait, the rich layers of which provide an insight into the lives of these two men, their artistic beliefs, and their relationships with each other and the world around them. So a quick biography of the life of Shannon and Ricketts. So as I said, Shannon and Ricketts met as students studying printmaking at the City and Guilds Art School in 1882, when Ricketts was 16 and Shannon 19. And from that point onwards, their lives became entwined, living and working together. Ricketts and Shannon were said to complement each other in life as in art, and Shannon was described as quiet and inarticulate, whilst Ricketts was restless and eloquent. And Ricketts was said to be hopelessly unpractical, and something which Shannon made up for, often packing his parcels of artworks and books, and also helping to prepare his materials for him. So they initially trained as wood engravers, which was a solid profession for an artist at this time, as engravings were still the primary means of illustrating books and newspapers and magazines. And it was also a discipline from which one could branch out into other art forms. And that is exactly what both Shannon and Ricketts did. And Ricketts' love of engravings, particularly those of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, in particular drew him to this medium. And he would go on to become a prolific book designer. And here we've got some lovely works by Ricketts. So in the middle, it's an illustration for Daphnis and Chloe. But Ricketts actually, although best known for his book illustrations, also did theatre designs and costume designs and jewellery design. Although he also did later create paintings and sculpture. So a beautiful costume design on the left, and then a stunning little bluebird brooch, which is currently at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. And from an early point in their relationship, the couple decided that Shannon would focus on his painting and become the kind of the great artist in the relationship, whilst Ricketts would produce these more artistically lucrative artworks, as I've said, jewellery, book design, costume design. And Ricketts apparently always maintained that while Shannon would one day become Sir Charles Shannon, he would always remain just plain Ricketts. But although working in different mediums to each other, both artists shared the same ideological artistic grounding, and that was of the old masters, Italian artists like Titian in particular, which there was then combined with the importance of imagination as upheld by the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And together, Shannon and Ricketts founded an occasional art journal entitled The Dial, which ran between 1897 and 1899. No, sorry, 1889 and 1897, apologies. And they designed and illustrated books together, including Hero and Leander, an illumination for which is actually on display in our current exhibition. And this work is of particular significance as the design was cut by the artist who drew it rather than a professional engraver. So Ricketts and Shannon were able to use their early training to then stand out from the crowd in their later work. We also have in the exhibition a beautiful painting by Ricketts called Siegfried and the Magic Bird, which is on loan from the Herbert Art Gallery Museum, and is thought to potentially be a theatre design for a theatre set. In 1894, Ricketts established the Vale Press, which was named after the home that he shared with Shannon, for which he designed decorations and illustrations for over 80 volumes. But sadly, it was closed in 1904 after a disastrous fire destroyed a large amount of their stock. And here we've got two beautiful portraits by Shannon of himself and Ricketts, a beautiful pair of kind of companion pendant pieces, which are currently in the National Portrait Gallery. By the 20th century, both artists were respected in their fields, and both men had been appointed as Royal Academicians. However, with the increasing interest in modern art, often pinpointed to an exhibition entitled Manet and the Post-Impressionists in 1910, which happened at the Grafton Gallery in London, organised by Roger Fry, Ricketts and Shannon's work was becoming more out of step with current artistic trends. The New English Art Club had been founded in 1886, and as an exhibiting body which wanted to accept the work of painters who were aware of the recent innovations in French art. And although Shannon did exhibit at the New English Art Club, his convictions were never shaken from his kind of desire and belief to follow the works of the old masters. And he wasn't really interested in following the kind of avant-garde circles, the artistic circles that were happening in London. Both he and Ricketts had really formulated their artistic beliefs at an early age, and they remained constant to them throughout their lives. And this kind of the ultimate principle that really governed their lives and their art was this idea of beauty, or art for art's sake. And in 1914, Ricketts made an assessment of their work, stating, which I think is beautiful, in some of the reviews, we are both pitted against each other and classed in the wane of English Victorianism. The last accusation does not pain us. It is softened by strictures on Watts, Rossetti, Burne-Jones, with whom we are classed, as not reflecting the life of our time. The general strength of our work is in design, in a regard for our material, and I believe in a certain decency of standard and aim. So although they were slightly out of keeping with the current and growing trends in British art, they were still very kind of proud of the work that they were producing, and they felt that it was really the kind of, as it were, the proper art that should be being produced. So after that little kind of potted history, it's really with this context in mind that we can turn our attention to this portrait, the man with the Greek vase, which, as I said, is in the collection at Leamington. So the portrait that we are looking at today, as I've said, was painted by Charles Shannon in around 1916. And despite its enigmatic title, it's unquestionably of his partner Ricketts, identifiable in this and a number of other paintings. A portrait by Shannon on the right. And Shannon produced a number of portraits of his partners, but it's this work in Leamington that I think has so many layers of rich meaning and really provides an interesting insight into the art. So in this work, Ricketts makes direct his attitude. The rich dark colours and the sitter's intense stare do, I suppose, give a sombre tone to the work, which is in keeping with the context in which it was made during the First World War, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But it's also reminiscent of the works of old master painters with which Ricketts and Shannon admired. In particular, artists such as Titian, who Ricketts was incredibly inspired by. And it's this inspiration that undoubtedly explains, Ricketts and Shannon were both inspired by Titian, and it's this inspiration that explains the painting's rich gold and red and black tones. And in terms of colour, light and texture, the painting also bears comparison with other Old Master portraitists such as Rembrandt. Shannon believed that all really fine painting should lean towards darker tones, which gave a sense of mystery and suggestion and left the viewer guessing about the sitter. And this is undoubtedly the case in this work, which is far from being a conventional Edwardian portrait. The couple's close friend, Thomas Sturge Moore, stated that almost the first quality to strike one, I think, in Shannon's pictures is a sense of quietness or even silence. His pictures seem designed to be the accompaniment of music, but of music present to the memory rather than the ear. And with this silence, and related to it, is the sense of the sadness inherent in beauty. And I think this phrase really could almost directly describe this work. And as you can see on the screen, there are direct parallels between the composition of Shannon's work and the works of Titian, particularly in this portrait of Jacopo Strada, which is currently in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. And Ricketts and Shannon would have undoubtedly been aware of this portrait, as keen followers of the artist. They owned some Titian drawings, and Ricketts, in fact, authored a monograph on Titian during his life. And in this work, Strada, an internationally active art dealer in the 16th century, is surrounded by examples of his wealth and cradles a classical Greek sculpture in a similar manner to the way that Ricketts holds the vase in Shannon's portrait. And the pops of gold and red silk in this work also have a counterpart, I think, in Shannon's portrait, in the screen behind him, the gold screen, and also the upholstery of the sofa that he's sitting on. You can see direct parallels really with the silk sleeves of Jacopo Strada's outfit. And I think such parallels are obviously far from coincidental. And through this reference, really, Shannon lays out both of the artists' artistic beliefs founded in historical traditions and set against what they saw as the artistic decline of society in this period with the advent of modern art. The gold screen and rich upholstery surrounding Ricketts suggest that this work was produced in the studio flat which the couple shared in Lansdowne Road in Kensington from 1902, and where Shannon and Ricketts lived together for a large part of their lives. And I think it's important here to really mention that, as well as being artists, Shannon and Ricketts were avid collectors, and they built up a rich and idiosyncratic art collection that combined 18th century furniture, Old Master drawings, Japanese prints, and Greek and Roman antiquities. At Shannon's death in 1937, the collection contained more than 1,000 items, the majority of which were bequeathed to the Fitzwilliam, although more than 300 Japanese prints went to the British Museum. And I think in that image I showed earlier, the costume design, you can really see the inspiration of Japanese prints, which were among Shannon and Ricketts' favourite things to collect. And when they were able to afford to do so, the artists went to Greece and Egypt, where they bought some of their antiquities, but the majority of them came from sales from or from London dealers. And the Greek vase in this work, which specifically is a Greek kylix or wine cup, was part of Shannon and Ricketts' own collection. And as I said earlier, and is now in the Fitzwilliam Museum, Cambridge, although currently can be seen at Leamington Spa Art Gallery Museum. And we can get a much closer look at the vase here. So the wine cup here. So it's a 5th century Athenian wine cup. And the interior depicts a man naked, but for a cloak and a lyre or harp. And this image would have been covered by wine when you were using the vessel, and it would only be revealed when the wine cup was drained. And around the base of the kylix, there's a scene from a symposium, which is an all-male Greek drinking party, which similarly could only really be appreciated when the cup was in use, when it was being lifted to the drinker's lips. And wonderfully, researchers at the Fitzwilliam have discovered that there's something very peculiar about this cup, and that is a smudge between the man's legs where his genitals should be. And if you look very closely, particularly on the zoomed in image on the right, you can see that someone has tried to draw in the genitals, and it's thought that this is actually evidence of a restoration attempt made by Ricketts himself when he owned the cup, and is in itself an indication of the importance that this work held, I think, in their collection, perhaps. So the inclusion of this wine cup in this painting is highly significant. In the portrait, the cup is not being used as it was originally intended. It's now clearly being appreciated as an art object by the sitter. He's not drinking out of it. Shannon depicts Ricketts very clearly showing the view of the cup, holding it out towards us to see the interior. And I think this gesture helps us to unlock many of the meanings behind the inclusion of this object, pleading, I think, for the protection of the arts, both from the dangers of the First World War, and as we've already discussed, from the onslaught of modern artistic ideas, and really provides a fascinating insight into the mentality of these two artists. So the painting was publicly displayed, this portrait was publicly displayed in 1917 at the Royal Academy, And contemporary critics at the time recognised this element of pleading. And in a satirical cartoon released entitled Royal Academy Depressions, showing works from the 1917 show, there's a satirical cartoon of the portrait entitled The Unhappy Diner Who had been refused a second helping. And you can see here Ricketts holding out the Greek vase. And so I think this sense of almost kind of Dickensian, please sir, can I have some more, coming through this pleading in the work. And although this is rather humorous in the cartoon, I think it actually highlights so much more a sadness really that is at the centre of this work. And that is, I think, related to the fact that during the First World War, it's thought that Ricketts really underwent something of a midlife crisis and a crisis of identity. He was incredibly stressed and anxious about the destruction of cultural artefacts during the war in continental Europe and the potential destructions of works in the UK from bombing raids. And he wrote and lobbied for the protection of artworks, writing to the Times about the precautions that should be taken at museums and at Westminster Abbey. But his letter was not published, and this left him very shocked and incredulous at the apparent indifference of society for these artworks. And he actually carried on his campaign in letters both to national newspapers and to museum officials. And he wrote a private letter to the director of the National Gallery, Charles Holroyd, advocating for the removal of paintings by Michelangelo and the other great Italians, which had some success. And at the British Museum, Ricketts was also responsible, together with Claude Phillips, for the removal from there of the Elgin marbles and some of the Greek vases. But it was an incredibly difficult time for Ricketts emotionally, and his response to the inaction of museum professionals led him to write this excellent phrase, this excellent few sentences. He writes of the utter worthlessness of our museum directors and trustees. The art world in England is headless, heartless, worthless in all matters of policy and responsibility, our press venal and idiotic. So I think the impact of the First World War and, as I've said already, the increasing popularity of modern art made Ricketts feel something of an art outcast, an old fogey, a last bastion of tradition in a world which he saw as in decline. And it's perhaps, I think it is this feeling of despair that we really see at the centre of this work, with the sitter's intense expression, peering out from the darkness and literally cradling the cultural artefacts which he held so dear. And it's a feeling that I'm sure that Shannon also shared. And in revealing the mental torment that Ricketts was undergoing in this portrait, I think Shannon creates a powerful sense of intimacy between the viewer and the subject, highlighting his close emotional connection with the sitter. And such intimacy is par for the course when it comes to one partner depicting another. And here, as this is a lecture for the De Morgan Foundation, we have a beautiful work by Evelyn De Morgan of a portrait of her husband, William. And we can see, I think, some great similarities between this work and Shannon's portrait. And this work by Evelyn De Morgan is currently in the National Portrait Gallery. The works obviously share compositional similarities in the fact that both subjects are sitting cradling works of art that were of great importance to them, and really of great importance to their identity. And it's thought that in this portrait by De Morgan of her husband, it reveals something of her husband's inner anxiety, as he's holding closer a lustreware vase, which is thought to be the last that he made before relinquishing pottery production. So this portrait is really, in many ways, also a testament to her husband's identity, a tribute to his dual talents as an artist and writer, but also in part a farewell to their home in Chelsea, which they had to vacate in 1909, which is when this portrait was made. And I think in the same way, And the inclusion of the Greek vase in Shannon's work acts as a testament to the home and the collection which he shared with Ricketts, shedding light on the experience of two men living together in a queer relationship at the turn of the 20th century. Through this portrait, Shannon is able to subtly reference his relationship with Ricketts at a time when homosexual relationships were not just taboo, but homosexual sex was illegal and punishable by imprisonment. This wine cup would most likely have been used at a symposium, the all-male drinking party, which is, as we've seen on the exterior of this cup. And a symposium was really a place where men in ancient Greek could gather, listen to music and poetry, and talk about kind of philosophical ideas. And by including this specific cup in the painting, Shannon aligns himself and Ricketts with this all-male world, and more broadly with ancient Greek culture, where homosexuality was more widely accepted than it would in England. And Shannon and Ricketts were far from being alone in this interest, and this interest in Greek culture and Hellenism was shared by many other people in a kind of subculture of queer British artists at this time, particularly most famously the writer Oscar Wilde, but also the artist Aubrey Beardsley, and many of the other followers of the aesthetic movement of aestheticism. Shannon wasn't the only one to create art referencing Greek culture, and this is another work that is currently on display in Leamington by Ricketts, one of his paintings, called Choosing a Mask. And here you can see a youthful figure, probably an actor, selecting a mask for his theatrical performance. And this is not the only portrait of Ricketts by Shannon, which shows an item from their collection, or that shows a Greek vase from their collection. The dish in this work, this other portrait of Ricketts, an earlier portrait which is in the MPG, shows a dish holding snowdrops, and that is also thought to be another one of the antique items which was collected by Ricketts and Shannon. The historian Matt Cook has suggested that Shannon and Ricketts' collection was a way for the men to articulate publicly the bond that they shared, as there was nothing wrong with two men sharing a collection, and in fact in this period collecting was a hobby that was praised as being in keeping with Britain's imperial spirit and a sign of a cultivated mind. Shannon and Ricketts' collection was a way to conform whilst expressing their non-conformity through their unique and joint taste. And furthermore, by welcoming like-minded individuals into their home to see their collection, they could further shape and express their sense of self. Oscar Wilde was a frequent visitor, and Ricketts did a number of book illustrations for the works of Wilde. And Wilde remarked that Shannon and Ricketts was the one house in London where you will never be bored and where you will not be asked to explain things. Nothing should be explained. So I think in this portrait, the two artists' bond is made clear through reference to their domestic arrangements, joint financial arrangements, and shared artistic pursuits. It's important to note here that after the Oscar Wilde trial, it became even more important for queer men to conceal their true nature and feelings in this period. And historians have found very little reference in the diaries and writings of either Shannon or Ricketts, which provide specifics of their relationship. Out of necessity, but I think also as a result of their personality, both artists were incredibly private and did not really even reveal to their friends much about their relationship. The relationship, therefore, between public and private is particularly interesting in this work. It's, on the one hand, an intimate study by an artist of his partner, referencing his mental state and artistic beliefs and their shared bond. But also, it was a painting intended for public display. It went on display at the Royal Academy, where it could be viewed by anyone. So it's important to recognise that whilst this portrait is a fascinating window into Shannon and Ricketts' relationship at this time, it's not a public declaration of it. And so we've explored two different layers, really, of meaning in this portrait: the fears of decline of artistic society in the face of war and new ideas, and the articulation of the artist's shared bond. And what's important to realise here is that these two ideas are really closely bound together. Art was not just an interest for these two men. It was the most important thing in their lives, the centre of their world. And I think more than anything else really connected them was their artistic similarities and their shared passion in the arts. And their collection, their artistic pursuits, and their joint aesthetic investment in their home bonded them together. And this portrait by Shannon and Ricketts is ultimately a plea to protect their way of life and speaks to their desire, I think, to maintain a worldview through which they have found belonging in the face of potential alienation from society, through friendship with each other and other like-minded artists, through collecting and an appreciation of certain artistic principles founded in the aesthetic movement. And just before I come to the end of my talk, there's another way in which I think this kylix is significant, but this is really an after the fact meaning, I think, separate from Shannon's artistic intention and instead based on what we know of the couple's later history. So then, sadly, in 1929, Shannon fell off a ladder whilst hanging a painting in his house, with his shared home with Ricketts, and he suffered serious brain damage from which he never really recovered. And Ricketts sold and donated a number of items from their collection to pay for Shannon's nursing costs. And Ricketts actually died 2 years later, before Shannon did, of a heart attack, which was thought to be induced by the distress of Shannon's accident and also exhaustion from work. Shannon wouldn't die until 6 years later. And in J.G.P. Delaney's biography of Ricketts, the author notes that really during the First World War, the destruction of artworks seemed to distress Ricketts more than the destruction of human life. Ricketts' decision, therefore, to sell parts of his collection takes on an even greater significance, I think, and highlights the strength of his love for Shannon. This portrait, therefore, can be seen as a testament of Ricketts' love for his collection, and therefore of his even greater love for the man who painted him. So this painting is an intensely multifaceted artwork, which offers a fascinating insight into how the two queer men of the period expressed and experienced their identity through art at the turn of the century. In my mind, it encapsulates so much of what makes Charles Shannon and Charles Ricketts who they were and the unique and changing time in which they lived. And just before I finish, just a quick plug that this portrait, along with the kylix, are currently on display at Leamington's Bar Art Gallery Museum until the 18th of September, as is our summer blockbuster exhibition, Modern Pre-Raphaelite Visionaries, British Art 1880 to 1930. Both are completely free to attend. And also as a quick plug, if you've enjoyed learning about this period through my talk, we are holding a one-day conference at the gallery on the 9th of September, where you can learn more about these artists working at this period and what made them tick, and tickets are available to book through our website. But thank you so much for listening, and I do really hope that you've enjoyed the talk.
Thank you so much, Jane. I certainly really enjoyed the talk. So that was brilliant to have the lives and works of these artists illuminated. And I love the way you did that just through a singular portrait and use that as a starting point to expand on all these ideas. So thank you so much. If anybody does have any questions for Jane, please could you type those now into the chat box? And I am very happy to read those out to Jane. Got some messages of thanks coming in so far. So again, thank you so much. Whilst we wait for people to have a think, if there are any, of course, then I've got a question for you, Jane, which is that the interpretation that you used today was very much from a place of the artist's personal lives and celebrating that. But I wondered if you knew sort of any previous generations in history, whether that had been sort of used to interpret the pictures or whether that had been skirted over and any other attributions of meaning have been attached to the painting, particularly whilst homosexuality was still criminalised?
I don't know particularly. I know that the painting was, so obviously there's the initial reaction in 1917 from the Royal Academy, which I think wouldn't have engaged probably at all with with any of the kind of deeper meaning between them. I mean, the fact that Shannon and Ricketts were a couple was very widely known, but I mean, and a lot of people speculated about the exact kind of nature of their relationship, but they were both incredibly private. They didn't actually move. They didn't go to any of the kind of clubs or anything that Wilde did. They didn't really like go to kind of big parties or anything. I think they really just liked collecting art, and they just stayed home with their art collection and didn't really do like a huge amount. So they kind of avoided quite a lot of the things that might have courted controversy with their relationship. And so although they couldn't kind of shout about their relationship at the period, they weren't really in any danger of being kind of blackmailed or followed or anything, or kind of revealed. And so I think probably that the painting probably wouldn't have been interpreted in this way very much at all. I think it would have been very much interpreted in the idea of them holding on to this kind of their artistic beliefs that kind of founded in the 1880s and 1890s, and aestheticism and the importance of old masters. So I think that's how it would have been interpreted. Obviously, there's the quite humorous response in 1917 of please, I can have some more. The painting was bought by the wife of Edmund Davis, Mary Davis, who was in her own right an artist, and was a very close patron of Charles Shannon and Charles Ricketts. And her husband and her bought a large number of their works, and actually in the end gave them a house to live towards the end of their lives. So perhaps when she bought it, she might have seen something in it that maybe the wider art establishment didn't. And I'm actually going to try and do a bit more research and look at her diaries and things to see if I can find any reference to the work, because apparently, as written in the biography of Ricketts, although I haven't actually found where the primary source behind this idea is, apparently she sold some of her jewellery to raise the funds to buy this portrait. So she clearly thought it was a really important piece. And in a lot of the contemporary writings about Shannon, kind of from 1920, 1924, they often describe this particular portrait as being kind of really high quality and kind of a masterpiece of Shannon. So I think at the time it wouldn't have been interpreted in this lens, in the lens of kind of their queer identity. In recent years, Shannon and Ricketts have become a lot more popular as museums consciously work their stories become a lot more well known as museums consciously work to kind of be more inclusive in the narratives that they tell around their artworks. So the Fitzwilliam in particular, which has a huge number of their artworks, has done a number of kind of engagement and curatorial projects around it. So the artworks are being increasingly interpreted in those ways. This painting, I kind of really fell in love with it in lockdown, and their story and everything that it kind of holds in one painting. So, but it hadn't really been, it had been in recent years kind of explored in LGBTQIA plus trails and things, but kind of 20 years ago it wasn't really discussed in those circles. That was a very long, winding answer.
That was a fabulous answer. Yeah, it covered everything, and led us on to learn more about your forthcoming research, which is really exciting. And I think we'll all be pleased to see the results of that. We haven't had any more questions from anybody, so that just shows what a lovely, thorough talk you gave.
Very comprehensive.
Last chance, anybody, if you would like to forward any questions on to Jane, our wonderful speaker today.
And if you do ever have any questions, you can also email me. It's jane.simpkiss@warwickdc.gov.uk. So if you ever have any questions, do please feel free to get in touch.
That's very kind, thank you. Well, I shall leave everybody to enjoy this sunny afternoon, but I hope it is where you are. It certainly is where I am today. And thank you again, Jane, for giving your time today and illuminating these two artists who definitely deserve to be more widely known. And
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Great. Have a good afternoon, everybody, and a good weekend. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.